Assalamu alaikum, peace be with you and welcome to Islam and Life with me, Tariq Ramadan, broadcasting from London. In today's show we ask the question, are the principles of Islamic banking applicable in today's economy?
After the banking crisis of 2008 and the collapse of financial markets, doubts have emerged on the capability of the modern financial model to sustain a healthy economy. Islam's strong prohibition of usury, riba, in particular, is seen as a new foundation for a healthy banking system and consequently a sustainable and fairer economy. In recent years, modern Islamic banking has been implemented with a level of success in some Muslim and even non-Muslim countries. There are reports estimating that the assets controlled by Islamic banks at global level are around 200 to 500 billion US dollars. This figure is growing at a pace of 10 to 15% per year. The main target group of the Islamic banks in the West is their Muslim population. With the prospect of millions of Muslims living in the EU and the US, the Islamic financial model is seen to be a feasible alternative in the future among Muslims. But can this change bring a new hope for Islamic banking to be more recognized among other institutions in the West? This week's Islam and Life asks, are the principles of Islamic banking applicable in today's economy?
If we look at the situation in the world and what happened since 2008 with the economic crisis, questions were asked and put about the sustainability of the economic order. Some were saying capitalism and the neoliberal system is over and there is an intrinsic disease, something which is not working, and we need to find an alternative model. Others were talking about moralizing the economic system and the neoliberal system. This is what we heard from Nicolas Sarkozy, the French president, saying, we want to moralize capitalism. And others were saying, these are two contradictory terms. It's not even possible. And on the other side, we had Muslim scholars, Muslim thinkers saying, but we might have an alternative model based on Islamic principles, Islamic economy, Islamic finance, Islamic ethics in economy. And this is where the discussion started. And some institutions in the West and in Muslim majority countries started to promote it in a better way and getting some successes on the ground, while not saying or not claiming that there is an alternative economic system. So are the tools and the means and the objective of an Islamic banking, Islamic finance, Islamic economy able now to face the element of the crisis from within the capitalist system? Do we have an alternative model? What are the steps forward? These are critical questions in our world, not only for the Muslims, but for the world and the economic order as such. To answer all these questions, I'm joined by Islamic finance specialist Shabir Razvi, director of Islamic Dialogue Foundation and principal of International Finance Solutions Associates. Thank you so much for being with us. Let me start with this question, which is disputed from within the Islamic universe of reference among Muslim scholars and economists about Islamic finance and Islamic economy. Because if we talk to some economists in the West, they say there is nothing like Islamic economy. This is a concept which is empty of any substance. How would you define this approach and this philosophy when it comes to economy today?
Assalamu alaikum. It's a pleasure to be here. I think when we look at Islamic economic or finance, it can't be looked at it in isolation, because each of the instruments of society function in a broader concept. And on top of everything lies politics and culture, if you like. So if you have a communist model, if you like, a socialist model of politics, then you'll have a different economic model that derives from that particular approach. If you have a capitalist, and within capitalist model, you have, what is called the laissez-faire approach to capitalism, whereby you leave everything to the market forces, and you allow the rich to become rich and the poor to become poor, if you like, because that's what laissez-faire means, that no regulation, no control, allow the capitalists to operate in the manner that they wish.
At least no rules for the poor and some protective rules for the rich.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then you also have within that a Keynesian approach to economics, which is, you pump more money into the economy, whereby you create jobs and opportunities, and you have a monetarist school of thought.
But
so, there are complexities within that. But I think the key that what I'm trying to sort of perhaps answer your question is that the political composition of society is very, very important in understanding how the economic mechanics work. If the politics is devoid of ethics and morality, then you have economics and the financial system and the banking structure which would be based on that kind of approach.
Yes, so that's a good point. We'll come back to this, but just while listening to you about the way you are dealing with, the economic system and the economic models, you are saying, in fact, up to the line, upstream, there is, in fact, an economic philosophy or philosophy dealing with the economic system. So the economic system in itself is a philosophy of life, that it's based on principles. My point, just to start with, because this is a discussion that I had with some economists, that is not clear. Would you say that economy is a science or economy is an ideology?
I think it's definitely not a science. The economists like to portray themselves as scientists, yes, because obviously then they can get higher salaries and professorships and tenures at big universities. But in reality, it is a social science. No matter what, schools like London School of Economics and others may teach quantitative models and quantitative analysis. No matter how many figures and how many models you make, the human factor is always there. And humans cannot be quantified because humans are operational in a different manner. They have their own moral and their own ethics, which is derived again from the culture that the people may be living in. Therefore, to say that economics is devoid or unbiased is, I think, foolish and really is the academics and the intellectuals are being dishonest.
But it's not a science, but you wouldn't reduce it to an ideology?
Well, yes, of course. As I said originally to start with, that yes, it is ideological because, if someone is operating in a capitalist model, that is an ideology, if you like.
So in fact, the models are representing something or translating the principles, and the principles are based on a vision, a philosophy, an ideology.
Absolutely. Not only following, they're actually replicating.
Replicating, okay. So let us come to Islam, and Islam as a reference in economy. What are the main assets of Islam or the Islamic approach in economy or finance that can help us to face the elements or the dynamics within the contemporary crisis?
Well, actually, since 2008, when we had the big crash with the Lehman Brothers, and for the last 4 years, the whole of the world has been suffering, and especially the industrialized nations, the bastions of capitalism, if you like, where the IMF and the World Bank would go to the third world countries and say that, have what is now called austerity measures, or have structural change,
the structural programs.
Don't subsidize the the ordinary food that the people may use, reduce taxes, privatize, all that kind of sort of paraphernalia that goes with trying to control a particular country or a nation or a group of people. So when we look at that particular aspect since 2008 for the last 4 years, I think everyone, even the most sort of, if you like, the fundamentalist capitalist, are thinking that, something is going wrong somewhere and we need to address this. How do we do? And I think the capacity, the intellectual vision is not there even in academia at this moment. Yes, there are lots of works being done at Durham University, at Cass Business School in London and other places where they are now teaching ethics as part of business courses.
Yes, but implicitly in what you are saying now is that intrinsically there is something which is going wrong in the system. So we have one approach saying it's intrinsic to the system. Others are saying it's structural. It's a question of, it's a dynamic, a structural dynamic, and we can just try to regulate, which is, by the way, what Soros and Stiglitz are saying. Regulation is the way forward. What is coming from the Muslim mind, and not only, by the way, many people who want, and this was the first positioning of Karl Marx when he was saying, as intrinsically the capitalist system is going towards crisis after crisis, and it's going to be getting an implosion from within. What you are saying is that intrinsically there is a lack of ethics, so the system in itself is not viable. There is something which is going wrong with the whole paradigm.
Yeah, perhaps I need to elucidate and express it more clearly, is that yes, there is an issue of ethics and morality within the system. Now, how do you change that? That raises a question whether the system itself is rotten, or you can do some tinkering, on the periphery or regulation or whatever. But until the mindset changes of those who are operating the system, to be fair, to be just, to be ethical, to be moral, to have sustainability. The whole concept in Islam, if you like, is that we are custodians. We are stewards of this planet. Even the children that we have from an Islamic perspective, we don't have ownership of them, if you like. We have them for a period of time to make them civil human beings. So we are stewards of our own children. Similarly, of our planet or the business that we are running, it is only a custodianship. So if one takes that as a key factor, that we are stewards of whatever we are doing, whether we are running a bank or a business or any enterprise, then you have a different approach, a different paradigm, if you like.
That's all fine, but what would you say to people listening to what you are saying, that, it's an other philosophy, that we are custodian, that this doesn't belong to us. We have to respect nature, respect human being. And at the end of the day, what we want is an economy at the service of the people and not the opposite. What we want is a moral economy. In fact, economy is not to make money. It's to let the people live with dignity. All this is good. Now, practically speaking, do you have answers to the contemporary element of the crisis that we are facing? Do we have practical answers to these practical problems?
I think there are huge practical answers available. It's just that in the past, perhaps we didn't have models to look at. It was perhaps theoretical. And also, if one looks at, Prophet's life, for 10 years before his death, he was a businessman. He used to take a caravan from Medina to Syria. How did he operate that business? Did he borrow money? What profits did he pay on that sort of money to the people that he took loans from, and so on? So all those things are very interesting, and I think some academic work needs to be done on that area. At a practical level,
give me, for example, one or two examples of what now could come from the Islamic contribution to the contemporary.
I think the practical, one of the fundamental things of Islamic finance and banking is that the gharar, risk element, should be eliminated, which is haram, forbidden, and gambling. And now we realize, and most of the commentators and the economists themselves are saying that, investment bankers, the people who operate on the derivative space in the banking sector, they were usually using that space as a big casino. Therefore, they were gambling.
Anything which has to do with speculation in itself.
So the practical is, take the risk element, gharar, out of it, that,
But how is it possible to do this now?
Well,
Any economist or so-called serious economist I talk to, when I say, we are against speculation, say, okay, that's fine. We heard this before with the communist approach. And when you say no interest, they say, forget about it. The whole economic system is based on it. So it's not going to change like this. What is the answer?
And that is the argument also. A lot of Islamic academics and scholars actually say that the current operations of the Islamic banks or the windows in the conventional banks.
Exactly.
For instance, HSBC has a Mana Bank. And sometimes I laugh myself that, HSBC, which operates in a totally capitalist model, how does it have an Islamic window?
It's just to get a market, to add a market to the other markets.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And quite often, and quite rightly, I think the scholars are saying that, it's only a veneer, and embedded in all these products is a form of interest. That's a debate in itself, that, what is the definition of interest? What does interest mean, usury or not?
You are quite critical of what is presented now as Islamic banking and finance in the traditional and classical big banks in the world, and at the same time you think we can get a solution coming from this.
Absolutely.
So how?
It's very easy. Look, I think I was attending an Islamic finance conference some years ago in Istanbul or Geneva, I can't remember, and one of the scholars was asked that, there isn't any difference between Islamic banking and conventional, you're just conning us. He said, look, at the end of the day, what's the difference between halal meat and haram meat? If it's sort of sheep or a lamb, it just, because you say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and you slaughter it in an Islamic way, it becomes halal. Similarly, at least, and this is, I'm being charitable, although I'm critical, but I'm being charitable, is that at least some steps are being taken. However, what does disturb me is that, the Islamic bankers themselves are really of the same mindset. They also want to make as much profits as possible. The lawyers, the Muslim lawyers, they're not really actually following the steps of the Prophet. They're actually looking at profit, what maximizes their return. So there is that thing that needs to be squared up.
But this is the essential. This is the starting point of everything which has to do with changing the paradigm. At the end, it's not to make money. And the understanding that I see sometimes in some people who are involved in Islamic finance is they want the same profit with other means, which the mindset is still there. The capitalist mindset is there. So do we have now something to provide the world with when it comes to an alternative system?
Well, there is an alternative. As I said, to be a little bit charitable, work is being done. Therefore, perhaps one needs to, again, the point that I was making earlier is of education. It really starts at universities, at business schools, where the professor and the academics in the past used to teach that, go out, boys, you're the masters of the universe, have everything in quantitative analysis, and you make money out of it. Perhaps they now need to start teaching that, it requires for us to be more socially responsible. These are not woolly ideas, because there are investment funds which are defined as socially responsible investment. They're actually performing a lot better than conventional funds.
Ethical investments.
Yeah, ethical investments and all that kind. So we have a model, and there is a huge sort of, if you like, convergence between what is defined as ethical investment or socially responsible investment and what the Islamic banking or the financial sector is trying to achieve.
Yes, but it could be 600, 700 billions dollars, for example, but still it's very marginal.
It's very insignificant, half a billion. I mean, just the Spanish banking was rescued by 200 billion, So, the money or the funds that are in the Islamic space are really quite minuscule compared to what is happening globally. As I said, the tragedy, if you like, from the time that the whole Islamic banking or Islamic finance ideas were first promoted in the 1920s by Abu Ala Maududi in Pakistan and Hassan Banna in Egypt. At that time, there was some theoretical work done, and later on, Shaykh Bakr al-Sadr, 30 years ago, gave a whole concept when he compared communist model and the capitalist model and gave an Islamic model to it. So we really have to change the whole thinking pattern. And I think with the crisis that we have had and the crisis that we are facing, I think there is some focus. When there is huge problems like this, attention changes and people start thinking what needs to be done. If we don't, I think, whole of humanity is in a sort of a jam at this moment.
Yes, but the problem is that if you look at the 100 years and the reformists, people were resisting. You talked about the Islamic movement at the beginning of the 20th century. They were very much against the capitalist system, and they were trying to find an alternative. It was not only theoretical, they were practical examples, dealing with enterprises, middle, big, and trying to resist with something which was a system with no riba, with no interest. 100 years later, what we find is people who are accepting now to deal with the economic order, even the so-called now Islamist movements in the world. They are ready to deal with the World Bank, with the IMF. So they are accepting the capitalist system as if to get the political recognition, you should compromise on the economic side. Do we have now something which is coming that we can just quote and refer to as, oh, this is something which is alternative? There is a way here that we can see that something could come out of it.
Well, as I said, Islamic banking and finance, because it has been operating for the last 20, 25 years in a more significant manner, that's one sort of model, albeit not a perfect model, but at least it gives
the first step.
Yeah, it gives us some instruments, if you like, to some markers whereby one could sort of look at the journey, how it's going to go forward. Secondly, obviously, with what's happening in the Arab world and in the Muslim world generally over the last year, 2 years, we haven't come to the conclusion as yet, with Egypt or Algeria or whatever. I think there would be some interesting developments when those governments, if you like, are Islamic. So they will have some other ethos, if you like. And Iran, again, is a very, very good model in many ways, how Islamic banking or Sharia, I hate the word, Sharia compliant models which are working in Iran itself. So again, that could be a way of looking at how to apply it to other countries. And Malaysia is also a very interesting example, if you like, whereby the banking sector, they have quite a lot of Islamic finance, and the take-up is not just by Muslims, but actually by the non-Muslim population living in Malaysia.
Thank you so much. I think that we can understand from the beginning of our discussion that we need to get a better understanding of how do we deal with an economic philosophy, which is really based on what you said, the principles, the mindset, the mentality, how we deal with economy, what are the objectives and what is the intrinsic essence of the economic system. And this discussion should also be part of what we are teaching, because at the end of the day, if we teach to economists that the only essence of economy is to make profit, at the end they will be part of the system and duplicate the system. And the second thing, which is what you were saying, is that the first steps over the last 30 and 40 years were done made by people who were starting to work at the grassroots level, thinking about Islamic banking, Islamic finance. Even though you are critical of what is presented today as Islamic economy, Islamic finance, still we need to be positive about the fact that means and the philosophy and objectives have been put and discussed, and something is coming out of it. It's the beginning of a very long way to try to find, with the Islamic principles, an alternative model, which is not yet there, but science are encouraging the whole philosophy. Thank you for that. Well, that's all we have time for. Please let us know your thoughts and views on any of the shows you have seen, and here is the way to contact us.
Islam in Life welcomes your opinion. So please send us your suggestions as well as criticisms on any of the shows you have seen or would like to see. You can do all this by emailing us at islaminlife@presstv.co.uk. You can also be part of our online platform by joining our Facebook page, Islam and Life, on Press TV, where you can share your thoughts with other Islam and Life fans, engage with debates, and view past shows.
Finally, I would like to thank my guest, Shabir Wazvi. Thank you so much for your presence and your input. And I hope to see you next week, inshallah. you.